All right. If everyone's ready, I guess we can do introductions and then we can start. So I'm Zach Fleisler. I use they, them pronouns. I'll be doing PMC and Alessandra, I'm sorry in advance for my C1.
I'm Nora. I'm the second speaker. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Margot. I use she, her pronouns, verbal POIs, LO. Leader of opposition.
Hi, I'm Kyler. I use he and pronouns, and I'm going to be member of opposition.
He also takes verbal POIs.
Also verbal POIs for both of us. Okay. If everyone is ready, then my time will start now. What is the point of the state and the federal government? They are the sovereign which unites our country and provides a fundamental definition of truth. For that, I could not be prouder to affirm in this speech a few things. We'll start off on definitions and overview and then move on to our case arguments. First, we're going to define this house given without saying. Spying is going to be very clear with our plan. We're going to be talking about covert operations, undercover agents, and external spy technology. We're not talking, however, about things like cyber attacks or more physical upfront attacks. We are trying to be more passive. That's what spying means. Then on allied countries, we're going to make this very clear that this is going to be a country that we have a reliance or dependence on, because we think this will be really important to the round. A country like Poland, while you can technically consider them an ally of the United States, we would say spying on them is realistically a waste of resources because the US doesn't care what Poland does. They're like a little follower that will follow us around. However, if you take a different country that we are dependent on in a certain regard, even a country like China, who we are fundamentally economically aligned with and dependent on, spying on them is not only important for our nation, but important for everything. But you can even take with nations in Europe. Something like France, we are reliant on because they have nukes and are a member of NATO. Thus, we do need to spy on them. I think this is a pretty clear definition and still falls under and shouldn't frame them out of the round. Then let's get into an overview. A lot of my opponent's offense will be garnered off either immorality or getting caught. I don't think this round should be focused on either. First, we would say the US doesn't have a moral compass as a nation. They really only focus on self-benefit. So because of that, the framework to this round should be exclusively around benefit to the United States government. And then second, I would say that US spying on average is pretty damn good. It doesn't usually get caught, and any examples that we have is usually about like 75 years later when the CIA ends up declassifying these documents. We might end up hearing a lot of examples coming out of the op bench, but I would like to say no matter how many examples you hear, there are probably 500 others which you haven't heard because they are spying and simply not declassified yet. That is a problem with the purpose of the resolution where the op can provide you examples, yet the government cannot because they are covert spying operations. With that, let's get on to case considering contention one, truth and skepticism. Prior to the framework debate, we need to evaluate the higher claim of what is truth and what isn't. We claim that truth, however, is not absolute and is rather created by individuals based on their own individual perspective. Why do you prefer this over anything else? Two warrants. First, opacity. We can never access another's perspective because we can never fully understand who they are or what they think. Every truth I create cannot be universalized because I can't guarantee that someone else will create the exact same truth because they don't have the exact same context. Second, linguistics. Truth is completely constructed by language, which is arbitrary. The chair I'm sitting in is only a chair because we all agree it's a chair. There's nothing inherent about the word chair. So what does this really mean? Absent language, there is no truth. But what does this kind of mean in context, and why does this matter in the round? I'm not just rambling. Because think about it, without a state, in the state of nature, there's infinite violence due to competing truth claims. This is infinitely worse than any other impact in the round because an ontological condition of violence prerequisites any other impact in the formation of the state in the first place. So what happens? This outweighs anything else, and the violence exists for two reasons. First, ambiguity, because everyone can assert their own claims to be true and refuse contestation, which means we always fight over who is correct, and it's unresolvable because there's no adjudicator. Second, self-interest. Everyone wants their own truth claims to be true because it benefits them, and there's only self-interest in the state of nature. Now, why do you only affirm because of this? Because of consistency with will of the sovereign. You want to prefer this always because it outweighs on bindingness. Only the sovereign is able to get everyone to follow her rule and enforce her law. It creates motivations for any moral rules we create. Otherwise, the framework collapses and truth becomes impossible. First, property rights. States have control over all property in order to prevent regress into the state of nature. Without property, we fight over everything because no one owns it. The states have the right to spy and send their property places because we can't interfere with it. Second, self-defense. States must protect the people from outside conditions. Having foreign spying is just an extension violation of the state's own right to enforce their own ends for protection. The op interferes with the ability for states to enforce their own policies. Third, restrictions. You can't make the state do something that contradicts or reinforces itself or restricts itself. The resolution, opposing the resolution places a limit on what states can and can't do, which limits the will of the sovereign and is bad. C2 is protection. 2 subpoints. First, on country and citizen. Let's say spying allows you to know what another country is doing without cutting or letting you know that another country is like about to cut off relations with the US like economically or do something that would drastically affect the United States. The US government having this information beforehand allows them to either adjust their economy, change their sources of imports, or actually fix the overall system insofar as they are not damaged by it yet. This means that we can be reactive to things and we can be proactive about responding to things instead of reactive after these things happen, which fundamentally mitigates the impact of any sort of trade war, any sort of foreign conflict, or any sort of spying operation, which means that no matter what the op case is, this contention gets mitigatory defense on it and is always going to be a reason to vote AF. Then realize that you get all these benefits for stepping in specifically to both the US government and the US citizens, because insofar as we understand that the US government's pretty beholden like its lobbyists, we would say that you should also prefer impacts to US corporations higher than anything else. And insofar as spying allows our corporations to get an economic advantage over other countries, I would say that's another independent reason for gov. Then talking about helping the federal government, we say that this gives the federal government info so they can be more knowledgeable and protect themselves and politicians, because like politicians face backlash when other countries do something and they don't know about it. Oh, you should have predicted this. Oh, how did you not respond to this? So we tell you this is actually better for politicians within the government themselves, and thus is an independent reason that they would want to spy on other nations, because it could increase their approval ratings, can make them more likely to be reelected, and makes them look like smarter figures overall, better leaders of the nation with more information. Because get this, the citizens don't know that they're spying. However, the government has all this extra information that allows them to make more informed decisions, to be a better government, and to help their citizens overall. And reminder, if they aren't allowed to do this, there is no objective truth in the round, which makes opposing fundamentally like undoable. Then let's talk about our third contention on soft power. To be able to barter, trade, and talk gives us like it. To be able to barter, trade, and talk with other countries, we are fundamentally benefited by having more inside knowledge about that country. Let's say I was talking with Nora and I suddenly knew that Nora is like the president of a country, but like maybe getting impeached because there's like a lot of problems going on within there. I now know that in the back of my head. It might not be public information, but I can use that position of leverage when talking with Nora to get better things from Nora. I can be like, oh, I'll support your government, but fundamentally that matters to her when it wouldn't have mattered in the past because of the specific information that I now have. This gives the United States fundamentally more soft power on the global scale. It means that we can exercise our own ability. Then we also tell you this will increase our alliances because we can share the limited knowledge that we gain by spying with other people that we are aligned with. This is always going to outweigh insofar as other countries that we are even spying on we can share information with because they simply do not know. What this means is that we see organizations like the EU, organizations like NATO are only going to get stronger in a gov world insofar as we are able to share information with other nations like China or other nations even within their borders that they simply do not know about. Fundamentally, what we would like to tell you is that every single nation has responsibilities to their own citizens. And because of that, every single nation has like reasons to lie internationally. Us spying on them allows the United States to get an advantage. For these reasons, we affirm. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I know Alessandra doesn't like off-time roadmaps, so I'll get that on time. Once again, Margaret Norman, she, her, verbal POIs, 8 minutes, 36 grace, starting time on my first word. Okay, quickly for a roadmap, I'm gonna go through top of case and then quickly go through our case, gov case. With that, okay, so a few things on their point about like sovereign being super important, great, good thing, obviously the only side that actually provides like any sort of like benefits. Okay, so quickly on their definitions, they say an allied country is like countries we have a reliance or dependence on, and they give the example of China. Judges, I want you to ask yourself, is the US allied with China? The country that Joe Biden, after finally fixing our diplomatic relations after that utter breakdown, called their leader a dictator. I don't think we're allied with China. I think this is entirely abusive, just like on the level of we had no ability to anticipate this argument that we're allied with China because the US just is constantly worried about like nuclear war with China. Like think what's like the most like stock impact you can think of a debate, war with China. Like clearly this is just really bad. We're not actually allies. This is completely abusive. We say an ally is just like a political and a military ally, maybe like NATO, maybe like a country like, you know, like the UK and France. Yes.
Would you consider economic allies, and would you consider Turkey like an ally of the United States, even though Biden called their leader an authoritarian dictator?
I think that like we can consider economic allies, but at the point at which like we had diplomatic breakdown, like I think political allyship overtakes economic allyship because like we're talking about the leader specifically. So seeing as we're very much not like politically allied with China, I don't think economic allies make sense. We have to consider like a holistic approach here. Okay. And then on the framing point that they give you, we say that like no matter when it comes out, it's still going to be very bad. Like it's inevitably going to come out at some point. So what's our okay, so 5 pieces of framing from us, then our counter plan. So we say that in the status quo, we are spying on leaders of allied countries. This is evident because like information about Macron got leaked in regards to Trump's documents. 2, we say Americans tend to be closely allied with democratic societies mostly because, political allyship takes over economic allyship. In democratic societies, generally, less power is held by individual government officials than in more authoritarian societies. This is super, super important. Like, obviously, the totalitarian regime holds more power than, like, a random congressman. We say that the heads of state play a different... Oh, wait, actually, no, never mind. And finally, we're going to say that most of our allies fall under our nuclear umbrella and thus have an incentive not to betray us. Okay. With that, just quick clarification here.
Point of clarification. I only flowed 4.
Yeah, I got to the 4th and said never mind because we didn't finish that.
Okay.
Okay, I have 2:22 on the clock, starting time now. And just a really quick clarification, observation I'm going to make about Gov's entire case before I get into my own. Their whole case is, like, predicated on the idea that we should be spying on other countries, which, like, yeah, sure, like, we agree, because they don't address the leader's point. They have to defend specifically spying on the leaders more than the citizens, which they don't address at all. They don't address why leaders specifically are, like, helpful. So, like, they haven't met, like, their fundamental burden in this debate. Vote off, I guess. Okay, so on the counter plan, 2 things here. 1, stop surveilling the leaders of allied countries. This doesn't mean we're entirely halting surveillance efforts in these nations, just not putting extra effort into spying specifically on the leaders. 2, we would increase surveillance effort to the leaders of countries the US is at odds with, like North Korea, China, Russia, etc. This is mutually exclusive because we have a limited capacity for spying, and it takes much more effort to effectively spy on countries the US is in conflict with because we don't know about their intelligence structures, how their country operates, etc. We can't meaningfully increase surveillance efforts into these authoritarian societies without scaling back in other areas. We think we should scale back in spying on allied countries. With that, onto our first advantage, counteracting the grade of threat, a bit of uniqueness. Like, we do not have information about a lot of these countries. I kind of outlined earlier, but generally it's just harder to get information about countries that we aren't allied with, that we maybe don't understand their government structure very well. Maybe we don't have like an allyship with like their intelligence services, etc., etc. Okay, so under sub-point 1, we say we have less information about the leaders of hostile countries. When a government official is not part of it's not a close ally, it's harder to get information because we don't have any embassies and diplomatic posts there, like as many. We don't usually have intelligence sharing agreements, and we have less or zero intelligence agents are like officially condoned to be stationed in that country. It's just harder to get information. Okay, so intuitively speaking, sub-point 2, we say that North Korea is always going to be like the bigger threat than France, right? So for the time being, at least, we're not worried about France nuking us, but like we did genuinely have escalating bad relations in like 2017 with North Korea, and we were concerned that they were going to do something to us. Russia is not currently fighting a proxy war with us. Russia is currently fighting a proxy war with us in Ukraine. It's not like Australia doing that. We're allied with these countries because we know we can in part trust them and cannot have an I scratch your back, you scratch mine agreement. There's a mutual skin in the game between the US and our allies, and it's unlikely that they choose to stab us in the back, at least compared to like China, whose leader Biden goes around calling a dictator all the time. So sub-point 2 is that because we're encountering the breakdown in diplomatic ties between like us and Russia, us and China, us and North Korea, etc., they are a bigger threat. Thus, we should be devoting more of our resources to dealing with this active threat. Just wait on the probability level. Even if you buy that maybe we could counteract some potential threat by surveying our allies, think about how much higher the probability of our enemies attacking us is and just how much worse it would be if they did attack us. If our enemies attack us, we have like nuclear war. Only under our side of the house do we have the ability to know this in advance and stop it. But if our allies attack us comparatively, we may have like a diplomatic squabble over oil, but we're allied for a reason. This is going to be a super low magnitude of impact. The impacts here is that like the TLDR is that only under our side of the house do we have the potential of getting necessary information to subvert a large diplomatic conflict that could potentially fall into like either traditional or nuclear war. The Gov does not get that. This is going to be the biggest impact in the round's cleanest place to vote. Okay, on to our disad of their plan. We say that this pointlessly deteriorates relations. Sub-point 1 is information about activities of the head of state are not going to be very useful. See our framing point. The leader of our ally is not as important as the other actions of our ally. Specific things about the presence of France, for example, are less important than specific things about Kim Jong-un because Kim Jong-un has more power within his country and we need every piece of information we can get about him. So as a result, we need to collect information on our ally. Like, we do not need to collect information on our allied leader, and doing so will do more harm than good because, and like, as a result, this is going to further the impression because we don't trust our ally, because basically they'll think, well, if you need to spy on me, like, why can't you trust me? Maybe I shouldn't be trusting you. Even like when this does eventually come out, because like inevitably some spy is going to make a mistake, especially if we're drastically increasing this. Whereas comparatively, our enemies probably already assume we're spying on them because like we're enemies. And finally, our allies will definitely pick up on the fact they're spying on them. Anyways, this is going to deteriorate our relationship. The impacts here are that the diplomatic relationships are going to worsen, economic sanctions are possible, really leading to devastating economic effects, anti-US sentiments are going to increase, and our allies are more likely to take policy action that the US doesn't agree with, and even potentially ally with our enemies. Okay, on to the government case. First, their truth absolute, evaluate this first. First away, I'm just going to say, like, this is giving K. That's, like, not allowed in the NYPDL. Okay, and then on the point here, like, there are no in-round impacts here. Like, I don't think that we should be discussing about, like, impacts, like, you can't evaluate this first. Like, no, this is ridiculous. There are no impacts under this point, and on the impacts of, like, actually opposing the nation and, like, or actually opposing the motion, and opposing the motion is bad. Good thing we don't actually limit what the US can do. Technically, Gov limits what they can do, because that way we can't limit the counterplan. Either this doesn't work, or Gov completely knifes itself. Okay, on the C2 protection point, they say that, like, we know what allies will do before we do it. Again, leader, not country. They're not specifically defending why we should be spying the leader, not, like, the country. So they haven't really met their burden. This isn't a very topical contention. Like, look to our framing. And on the, like, allies, we'll know what allies will do before they do it. We can probably guess what they're going to do before they do it. Like, we are allied. We have some intelligence sharing. We probably don't need to be doing this. Okay, on the point about, like, helping corporations, this doesn't work because we're spying specifically on the leaders, right? Like, you have no solvency. And you're only spying on the leaders because most leaders of democratic countries aren't also the heads of corporations. And then finally, on the USFG point, the USFG gets the same impacts by doing the alt plan, like no solvency here. Okay, on the soft power point, again, we're talking about the leader of the nation, not like just spying on the country itself, spying on the corporation. And like getting like personal details about the leaders is like weird. On the point about like you're able to barter better by having more inside knowledge, like you probably already have some inside knowledge because we're talking because like their whole point is about the country, like status quo, we're already spying on the country. On the like increases alliance point, like no, this does not turn this point. We don't think this increases alliance. We think it makes it so much worse. Because we're spying on the ally, and the ally isn't really going to like that, so think that we can't trust them. And then finally, we say that we can barter with the enemy's like information. This info is more valuable because it's harder to get. We should be prioritizing this information that is harder to get and more valuable in preventing things such as nuclear war. For these reasons, so proud to oppose.
Audio. Okay. Yeah, it's on. All right. I'm gonna get my timer up. Okay. All right, my time is going to start on my first word. If my internet cuts out at any time, please just stop me. And if I'm speaking too fast, just like raise a hand or let me know. With that, time to start in 3, 2, 1. Now, a lot to get through in this speech. Let's start right on the op case. Kind of want to hear the top case with their counter plan. Let's first start on their clarification that like the Gov's whole case about spying on other countries and that leaders are key. I first want to make it very clear that like when you are spying on the leaders of a country, you are intrinsically finding out a lot about the country. Like if you are spying on a leader, like and you're seeing like their communications, like what they're talking about, they're always talking about a lot of things that are going on in their own government. So like intrinsically by spying on the leaders, you're going to be like finding out like a lot about the country and a lot about like the geopolitics there and like anything that we need to know. But even beyond that, we say, okay, like all of our contentions also boil down to like spy on the leaders and like that as well. Moving on to their counter plan, they basically tell you like we don't need to increase surveillance on allies, and like increasing surveillance with nations that we are at odds with is like more effective. First of all, we want to make it very clear you don't necessarily like understand like which countries we are at odds with. And also Zach gives you this wonderful observation that goes completely unresponded to, that uniquely if we are attacked or betrayed by a country that we are at like an ally with, that is a lot worse like for the like United States, because now not only are we facing the fact that like we didn't know something about an ally, or that like we're facing like public backlash because we like trusted an ally that actually then like betrayed us, which is just a lot worse like perceptually for like the government. It also like that they can also like attack or like harm you a lot more. Second, I want to say like perm this, like you can do both. First, on the definitions, they can see that we should do like a holistic approach, which would include economics. I'm gonna get to that when I go back into the Gov case on like these definitions. But even beyond that, we tell like they then realize that like the concept of allies are at odds with are constantly in flux, and that's that like the counterplan is so vague that it could be considered like under the plan that like the Gov gives you. Also, we realize that like there isn't a definition of at odds with, just examples of a few means that like we can co-opt all the offensive from this counterplan. The US, a strong independent young nation who doesn't need anyone else, is at odds with every single country that they are dependent on, like per our definitions. And even if you don't give like the perm, realize that the counterplan is literally the status quo. Like unless they're increasing overall funding to the CIA or the NSA, which they will mention. Yes.
Isn't the US dependent on every single country on Earth not to launch a nuke because that would eradicate the planet?
Well, first of all, not every country in the world has nukes, but even beyond that, what we would say is like that's like not what we talk about in our definitions, but also just moving on from that, which I didn't mention because like per their own warranting, like spying is a zero-sum game. With that, let's go straight into the op case. On C1 of counteracting threats, basically like we don't have enough, like we don't have info about foreign threats like that we aren't like allied with. Like first, what we'd say is that like just like that blandly, just like not exactly true. Like we do have info because like we conduct investigation, we like conduct spying, and we learn about stuff from threats. But on the idea that like we have bigger threats in the world that we should like be like devoting our resources, we already tell you like multiple times in this round that uniquely being attacked by people that like that we are allied with is more uniquely harmful for the United States. But even beyond that, we're doing both. Like you can continue to spy on enemies and also keep watching allies, and that like beyond that, like on this like analysis of like nuclear war, like that like being mad means like none of this like ever triggers. Also what we tell you is that like because it's like mutually assured destruction, this is not going to actually happen. On the C2, like basically like on our plan, on their plan, how like they don't need to like collect info on a leader, and that allies are going to know if we're being spied. Two responses here. First, why this is low probability and realize that there's no impact. The nuclear umbrella overview shows like there's no retail or backlash. Like nuclear war, like in this debate, is not a probable impact. Like mutually assured destruction, like this is never actually going to happen. But even beyond that, like look to the status quo. Like the second response can see that like spying happens now, and then we don't see any of their negative with our allies or with other people that we're like at odds with. Our impact or scale are those like we just get better with like with the spying. Okay, with that, let's go straight back into gov case. I want to start first topic case. They first asked judges, like would the US be allied with China? First of all, yes, completely economically. Alliances are just not political, but like also like politically and socially, but also like very economically. Like first, the idea about like when like Margot says like quote like after fixing like the economic like relations, like it's basically conceding that they are fixed, like they are back up to like okay relations. But also beyond that, we tell you that like we're allied with tons of people that have like bad leaders or that have been like called out by the US like federal government for their leading, for like their leadership. For example, like Turkey, even though like Biden called their leader a dictator. Even beyond that is like Margot tells herself that we're considering econ allies, and we tell you econ allies are uniquely important in this round because of all of our economic impacts, which also go unresponded to. That's I'll get into our case, but also that Margot tells you that like holistic, and that's why we should only focus on political allies. Absolutely not. We tell you that both that both are important as long as there's some kind of dependence with this other country. Second, on the idea, they give you this observation on our overview, like no matter when like this information comes out, it's going to be like uniquely bad. First, they drop our observation about like the US not having a moral compass nation. But even beyond that, we tell you, first of all, the probability that this comes out is like very like low likelihood. Like I think like this is a great like analogy to the point. I think there's a quote where it's like for every like one spying operation that like you hear about, there are like some like 100 that you don't hear about. And that's because
That's fine. Where are you on your
I'm the top of Gov case.
Okay, great.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we can catch that.
Okay, lovely. Okay, I'm at 4:57. I'll start my time now. So it probably, first of all, is not going to come out because the US is just so good at spying and has been doing it for so many years. And then if like they choose to come out, aka if the CIA decides to declassify files, it's clearly because they don't think there's such a harm to doing so at that point in time. But even to tell you, this is a very big observation, really important to this round, is that fine, let's say it does come out. It's not going to actually impact the US negatively. Why is this? The US is quite literally the most powerful like country when it comes to like political like relations with other countries. We say like the US like quite literally funds like over 80% of like arms like for NATO, which is like considered like a huge like major defense alliance in our world. So fine, even if another country finds out that we are spying on them, what are they going to do when it comes to like the alliances the United States has, the economic power, the social, like the political power? We tell you that it does not actually matter. If the worst comes, if you buy the whole entire op case, if you quite literally believe that like all this stuff about the United States is going to come out, we tell you it is not going to matter because of how powerful the United States is, and like this is not going to actually make that much of an impact. Okay, on our C1 about truth and skepticism, we hear a few responses. First, basically just being like this is giving K, but like at all, like we just don't disagree with like this idea. It's just like not a refutation. But what we want to say is like, first of all, we want to make it very clear like what is happening here, and also like Margaret said that there's no impact under this point. Like a lot of responses like want to really frontline this contention, make it a lot more clear in case any of those are a little bit confused about it. Is that first of all we're trying to say like we're like talking about like reduce the state of nature because like we are limiting the ability of the state. What do we mean? We talked about how like in the state of nature then how like, there's like a lot of violence, and this is because like you have this ambiguity, like everyone's like asserting their own truth and their own claims out what is like true, leading to a lot of violence and just like not having like no violence. Our counterplan like our on the counterplan, this means that like they aren't limiting the state is incorrect, because their counterplan is quite literally like do what we are currently doing more, because like we are currently spying more on China and like for example North Korea. But even beyond that, like negating the app is fundamentally Yes.
In the status quo, are we not already spying on our allies?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. What we're saying, like, first of all, what we're saying in like to do like as in like affirming the resolution is that like spying on like the leaders of other countries, but even beyond that, I would say to the extent that we are like spying on our allies, we're not doing it in like the terms that like we are like advocating for. So we're not doing people that we like have dependencies on. So just make that very clear. But also negating AF is fundamentally limiting what the state is like, what the state can do. We want to make that very clear. That's like the crux of like our contention one is that by like not voting AF, you're limiting what what a state can do and like what it actually has. We give you a bunch of warrants that all go completely dropped and that are super, super important. Is that like only the sovereign is able to get everyone to follow the rule and enforce the law. It creates motivations for any morals that we create. Beyond that, we give you 3 warrants, 1 property rights, 2 self-defense, and 3 restrictions on how like you need to be voting AF here because like states must protect people from like outside conditions and the op interferes with the ability for states to enforce their own rules. Furthermore, we see that like, we have a gorgeous impact which goes clean conceded, which is on-tick violence. This means that if we begin to destabilize the state and not affirm the will of the sovereign, we can return to the state of on-tick violence. On our C2 protection, they tell you that this is not defending largely spy and like the country, they can guess what they're doing, and same with the op plan. First of all, the leader leads the country, you're going to be found out of the country. Not necessarily. If anything, spying on the leader uniquely gives us the in, personal conflict, etc. And finally, no, because we tell you how like uniquely worse if allies countries attack us. And finally, on C3 of soft power, they tell you that we're probably going to have some knowledge, and they turn to saying it's worse for allies. No, we may not have knowledge because like we're currently not doing the amount of spying. And finally, on their turn, that's worse for alliances. I'm telling you no because you're not showing the ally that you're spying on other countries. You just have knowledge which can come from so many other places, or just knowledge in general. Okay, all of that, so proud to affirm.
All right. This is going to be a mouthful. So, Kyler Parker, member of the opposition. So proud to oppose. I'm just going to get started right now. So quick off-time roadmap. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to address the top of the case. Then I'm going to get into gov case and then op case. With that being said, let's just clarify some key things in this debate that I think the other side wants you to like gloss over. Okay, status quo. We are spying on our allies. Like we are spying on our allies and we are spying on allied leader. We are pouring resources into these things that really aren't yielding that many significant intelligence results. In our counter plan, we really do some change here. We spy more on the countries that actually have the capacity to harm us instead of countries that actually won't harm us and can't harm us, which they kept harping on, but actually helps our side here. With this being said, let's just jump into the topic case. Okay. So basically, like, what are our like main points here? Like, one point here is like whether the information will come out or whether the information will not come out. Well, we said like I think both sides have agreed that the information is eventually going to come out, and when it comes out, backlash is inevitable because no country wants to hear that they've been spied on. So the backlash is inevitable. You have to buy our dis idea about like the backlash. Like all they say is that like the CIA will decide when the time is right. Like I'm sorry, the CIA is omniscient, and like the CIA won't be able to like wait 400 years until like no one like cares anymore. People will always care if their country like sovereignty is being infringed on. Like, I'm sorry, there is going to be the backlash. They kind of concede this point. So basically, we get it. Okay. And here's the point about like the betrayals, right? Like, the point about the betrayals is like before I even get into that, I should address the definitions debate here, okay? Because they're still trying to push this definition here that like of what an ally is. And let's just think about this for a second. Okay, so basically what government wants you to buy is that allied countries to the United States are, quote, any country the United States have, sorry, not taking it, have a dependency on. Okay, then they try to say that like this is every single country because like we have trade relations with every single country. And like if any country stopped trading with us, we'd like suffer. That becomes a dependency. Okay, so like here's the fact, right? The US could like cut off every single country, right? And like not trade with anyone and probably like exist. We're not dependent on anyone. By their definition, US has no allies, but also they're also trying to argue that China is an ally of ours. The thing is, their definition is the one that's ambiguous and really makes no sense. We gave you like a very clear definition. We say like the allies are like the traditional, like what we know in like commonly to be allies of America, like countries in NATO, like countries in Europe, not China and not Russia, because we are like, we go do trade war with China. We think China is going to nuke us. Like, do we think this of Britain? We do not. Like, judges, please do not get like lost in like the sauce here. What is an ally of America? It's very clear. These are countries we actually have like cordial relationship. We do intelligence sharing with. We have like economic relationships with that we're not in trade wars with. China is not an ally of the United States. Their definition is abusive and kind of like completely like messes up the debate because if we can't agree on what an ally is, like how can we have this debate productively? They want like allies to be everything and nothing at the same time. I think it's very clear who has the reasonable definition here that isn't abusive and boxes us out of the debate. Okay, with that out of the way, let's just look at what the topic case is here. Okay, so basically they are saying that like they're saying that the backlash is going to be worse when the ally betrays us. Here's the thing, zero probability the ally betrays us. They say it themselves, all these countries are like under our funding, like 80% of NATO funding, all these countries are under like our nuclear umbrella. They are not going to betray us. They have proven no incentive structure for why these countries are to betray us. So like you have to weigh this like it's a 0% probability, right? Think about the countries which are going to like take action against us. Our enemies, they are powerful. Like China is almost as powerful as us. They could actually do damage to us. And by pouring resources into this policy of only spying on the leaders, like not even like other things, just the leaders of allied countries who comparatively have less power than the leaders of our enemies, which are authoritarian. Think about how we are failing the United States by not collecting information about people who can actually harm us. This is so intuitive, and this is the core argument that's going to cut all of like government's arguments out of the round. Okay, with that being said, like let me just respond to the perm real quick. They say that like we can do both, and they say it's because like the people we are allies with are at flux. No, they are not. Like NATO is a contract. Like we have set allies through NATO. Like it's not like we just change the roster of NATO like the NFL teams. Like no, like it's a set roster of people that are NATO. We know who our allies are. Like there's kind of a consensus here. Sure.
Was Sweden part of NATO like before a year ago?
This is like really specific information that like you're trying to bring in here, but like, okay, if people are added, like, sure, maybe I'm sure they were an ally of us, even if they weren't officially there. The point is the US knows who its allies are. Okay, let's just like say they say that we have a vague, like their plan is so much vaguer. Like, who are we spying on? And they're saying like we're spying on like every country we're dependent on. So like, is that like every country or like no country? It's really unclear here. I think we have the clear plan. We are spying on like countries that are like decidedly hostile to us. This is the thing that makes sense. This is a clear plan of action. They're like, we're going to spy on countries we're dependent on. So that means they're spreading like all the resources, splitting them like thin across all countries. It really doesn't make sense. And you can't perm because we have finite resources here, and they want to like spy on everyone. And like we want to spy more concentrated on countries that are actually powerful enough to hurt us and have the incentive to hurt us, right? Like we're not at odds at every single country on earth. We're at odds with some countries, and we should focus on them because they could do terrible things to us and our citizens. With that being said, let me actually get into the meat of the case here. Okay, so first we get this contention on truth. And my partner said, this is giving K. And then Nora said, yes, I agree. So at the point at which they agree it's giving K, you have to drop the argument, if not the debaters, because Ks are not allowed in the New York Parliamentary Debate League as much as maybe they should. No, sorry, I'm not taking any more POIs. Like a K argument is just not going to carry the round for them because it's not spirit of lay debate. It's not spirit of NYPDL. I think that my partner and I really, like, frankly, didn't understand what they were saying. This was super inaccessible. Like, we had no idea what they were talking about. Like, even if we did understand what they're saying, and like to a degree we do, we say like they're saying we should limit the sovereign. We think this has no impacts in like this round because no matter what policy you take, you are limiting the sovereign in doing something because you are putting resources in one place or another. It's like opportunity cost, right? So this is really not like a real argument. And if they're talking about like what objective truth is, like which side gets more truth, maybe like we get more information because we're not like redundantly spying on specifically only like the leader of a country that like we're allies with. Like there's so many layers of redundancy here. It's kind of ridiculous. So please just drop this argument about truth. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It is K. And also, if they win this point, it doesn't really matter because of all the like the net benefit utilitarian impacts we have on our side of the house. Okay. This is their C2 about protection. Like, what is their contention here? They're saying that basically we'll know what the allies will do before they do them. Okay, allies will tell us what they're going to do before they do it. We're allies. Like, we have relations. We have intelligence sharing agreements. Like, the whole, like, our economic contract means, like, we'll get that information. So really, what we should be doing is we should be focusing on predicting the actions of unpredictable actors, of hostile actors. Think about our framing here. We said that, like, a dictator has more power to, like, influence their country than the leader of a democratic country, right? So if we're spying on a dictator, that's more important because their whims could dictate the entire policy of a country versus if we're spying on a president of a democratic like republic because his like whims, like what he had for breakfast that day won't matter as much in like the general direction of the country. We can get the general direction of the country by looking at like what they're doing in parliament, by looking at the news, by like spying on other government agencies. We don't have to spy on leaders. Like they just give no reasons just uniquely why a leader should be spied on. So they kind of just lose this point completely. They say like we have like corporations, like we do better for corporations. Spy on the corporations. This is not an argument for spying on the leaders. And actually, this turns to our side because in authoritarian countries, the leader and like the centralized government and the oligarchy has more power over corporations because more things are nationalized. See China. So by spying on the leader and the oligarchy of those countries, you'll be getting more information on corporations versus in a democratic republic where corporations just function on their own and aren't really involved in the government. Okay. As for soft power, like we'll barter with enemy info. Margot kind of destroyed this. Like, why would we barter with information we can already get for free? There's intelligence sharing, like not with China. With that being said, last 30 seconds, I'm going to touch on what stands in our case. Okay, advantage one, counteract the greater threat. Like this has been the entire case. Look at the probability, look at the incentive framing, look at the warranting at the case, right? When there's a single dictator, it's more probable that when a single dictator has more power to just send their country to war versus like an entire country that's democratic and has like checks and balances. Second point is sad, pointlessly destroys relationships. I have 3 seconds. They clean drop it. We win on this point. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Let me get my timer up. Yeah, 4 minutes, 30 seconds grace. Tyler, why did you make this 50%? I can't read this. Okay. Everybody ready? Okay, I'm gonna take the lack of no's as a yes. Time starts on my first word. Okay, quickly roadmap for the speech. I'm just gonna rehash what's an ally, our framing, what is Gov's fundamental burden, explain why our counterplan like still is mutually exclusive, is this that wasn't clear enough before, and go through some two-world analysis. First of all, okay, what is an ally? Clearly our allies are like military and political allies. How do we know this? First of all, just ask yourself, judges, is China an ally of the United States? Like, is China a political ally? No, I think pretty clearly, like at the point at which it's like the first thing people go to, like, what's the worst impact I can think of? War with China. Like, clearly not an ally for us. That's like the probable impact everyone goes for, you know, some meta debate there. But anywho, it's also just like clearly it's not an ally of ours, even if it's just economic, because militarily, that's always going to be more important, right? We all spend time on military, why like military action is important. So yeah, and I think in this debate, even if for some reason you buy, they're like, what's like an ally can be an economic ally, what's a lot more important is going to be the actual military implications of this, meaning we can still win. Okay, what's our framing here? What's the framing I gave you at the top of the case? What goes clean conceded? We say that in the status quo, we already are spying on the leaders of allied countries. Okay, so as Kyler and I gave you this observation, we're not seeing any of these impacts that they give you in the status quo, meaning there's like no reason that maybe if we did a little bit more, then we'd get any of the impacts they outlined for you because, you know, like marginal returns, whatever. Anywho, that basically takes out all their case. They have no offense. Okay. 2, American tends to be closely allied with democratic societies, and that in democratic societies, generally less power is held by like individual politicians compared to like totalitarian regimes. What does this tell you? It tells you that we're actually going to get some impacts on our counterplan if we, as we told you, we take away resources that we're currently putting towards spying on these allies and instead put them almost exclusively toward spying on like the leaders of our like countries that we are at odds with. We give you the examples of Russia, of China, and of North Korea, right? Clearly, we do get impacts here. Clearly, like, this is a mutually exclusive counterplan because it's a zero-sum game. And clearly, like, we're diverging, you know, this is not the same thing, clearly. Okay, what's the gut fundamental burden, though? It is that they have to prove that there's some benefit from doing the motion, specifically spying on leaders. Literally none of their contentions. Like, they just say, why is it good to spy on other countries? But like they don't tell you why it's specifically to go to spy on the leaders. As Kyler tells you, they have no offense in this debate. Okay, with that, I'm going to, and one more thing. As we told you earlier, and as I'm going to get to later, most of our allies fall under our nuclear umbrella and have an incentive not to betray us, right? So if, for example, the US gives NATO 80% of its funding, why would NATO betray them? Like, just why? They have no incentive to do that, meaning Gov doesn't get this impact. Okay, so what's the opposition collapse here? 3 things. 1, the abusive definition. According to NYPDL rules, we prove their definition was abusive because the country that the USFG is dependent on, such as China, like technically everyone's dependent on everyone, not to murder them. Like technically I'm depending on Kyler right now, not just get a knife and stab me. But like this just doesn't work, okay? So this is so abusive and nonsensical. Second point, preventing armed conflict. They literally clean concede the fact that we prevent armed conflict. Like only on our side of the house are we able to prevent armed conflict with our enemies because we actually know what they're going to do. Notice how they don't address this whatsoever. Look to the weighing I gave you in my LOC about look to the even if I gave you that even if under both worlds we're technically able to prevent armed conflict, it's so much more important to prevent armed conflict with our enemies because of how it's going to be so much worse in severity and how it's just going to like probably be more likely to impact out to nuclear war, or at least like someone dropping nukes because our enemies tend to have nukes. This is 100% probability. This is the highest magnitude we have in this like impact in this entire round, and there's a super high scope because we live in a global society. Everything impacts everybody. Like billions of people would die. Okay, what's the collapse going to be? Ally betrayal. We say that this doesn't work because I tell you in my speech, and as Kyler tells you in his speech, it's incredibly improbable that we get betrayed. Looks the unanswered, even if weighing I give you in my speech. Okay, don't let them collapse under their second or third contention. They spent absolutely no time in MG. There was no extension. Basically, they have no offense here, and they finally dropped our turn. Finally, what's the only thing they have left? This weird truth contention. However, as we've proven, there are literally no impacts because like judges in debate vote for things that take power from the state all the time, and yet like we still have countries that can take military action. This really doesn't matter. Look to our analysis on how it's a zero-sum game. For all these reasons, so proud to oppose.
Okay, are we ready? My time will start now. This speech is going to be all over the place, but I'll try to keep it definitions, my case, their case. Let's start off from the definition debate. We would say that our opponents are already behind during the LOC when they clean concede our definitions. What do I mean by this? First, Nora POIs and asked if economic allyships matter. Margot says yes. Then Kyler proceeds to not mention economic alliances in the next speech, and then they don't mention it in the LOR. They 180 from the definitions they argued for in the LOC. We would say this is already a voting issue as they called their definitions abusive, then called their own definitions abusive, and then changed what their definitions were. What we would agree on, though, is what Margot first said, that we should view this round from a holistic picture and say that allies can be anything, political, economic, or social, which is actually something that they don't even end up arguing for later on in the round. They try to change their position. The Gov is debating the largest moving target I've ever seen. Then, realize on the definitions debate, we are not saying that every single country in the world is an ally of the United States. That's not even an argument we've ever presented. We literally said during the PMC that Poland is not going to be spied on under our plan because it wouldn't even count. We give you a carve out. We tell you there that dependency is really, really what matters, insofar as if China made an action that would affect us, our entire economy would be hurt. Then they try to make this appeal to like motion of the judge saying that like China's the biggest impact that we would ever say in debates, the one that we all think of. Why is that though? It's because the US and Chinese economies are so intrinsically tied together that if we engage with war with them, the entire world falls apart. I mean, like 50% of our imports and exports, that's why we fundamentally care. Even beyond that, they try to go like the strongest warrant they give you the entire round is that the United States is mostly allies with liberal democratic nations. Therefore, spying on leaders won't do anything. However, there's going to be one massive problem here, which is they don't tell you why or give you a
point of order, pause time.
Yeah.
We gave this piece of framing in our LOC and it was completely unanswered in MG.
Hey, Margot, can you like specifically state what framing you gave and what argument is new?
Oh yeah, so we gave the framing, like we gave the whole, like we're primarily allied with democratic countries thing. That wasn't responded to, so yeah, like the attempt to respond to that and say like, well,
I would say we POI'd and talked about Turkey and then like said it again in the next speech.
And then I also talked about how ally countries are democratic countries are unique, gonna hurt us more.
Yeah.
Okay, it's discretion. I feel like it's new,
but I would say like I specifically.
It's a panel.
I like specifically said Turkey, and I'll then only use Turkey for the rest of this example then. Okay, time will continue now. Because look at a country like Turkey that Joe Biden literally called a dictator and then won the election, is in NATO, and we literally have nukes stationed there. I think insofar as that's the case, they lose any bit of offense on the United States being allies with only liberal democracies. Then, insofar as that, let's go over to our case and realize why we're winning, because their real big response to our first contention was it's giving K. It's not. It's not even giving K. If it's giving a progressive argument, it's giving a skep trigger, because a K is this, we're not really critiquing anything in this argument. What we are saying here is that the biggest response that you get is that judges have voted against state action many times, and none of our impacts have actually taken place. First off, take the exact same warrant that they give you. Debate is a game. We present you an argument as to why, if you negate, we will resort to a position of ontic violence. Insofar as they don't respond to any of the actual warrants, that fundamentally, if you limit state violence, state action, we get to that, then we do do get clean access to the link of the state of nature and the ontic violence, which outweighs literally everything on their side of the flow because they clean concede Nora's response of mutually assured destruction. That'll take out all of their offense later on in the round, so this should already be a gov ballot. But insofar as that's the case, you're already going to be preferring ontic violence over nuclear war. Then realize that they literally just try to tell you that like this is an inaccessible argument. However, we warrant it very well. We tell you that right now, like the concept of truth is really, really muddled, but the only offense that they're trying to get off this on the counterplan. They tell you that their counterplan means that they're not limiting state action and actually like whatever. However, they miss the biggest responses that one, their counterplan is the status quo because they aren't increasing any funding. What does that mean? What is my opponent's counterplan? My opponent's counterplan is that we should spy on our opponents more than we spy on our allies, and we just shouldn't spy on the leaders. But fundamentally, like, that's what we are doing right now. They keep on just telling us who we are spying on and who we aren't spying on, but they don't give you any warrants as to why we are fundamentally spying on every single one of our allied leaders right now. I would be very honest, I don't know exactly who the CIA is spying on. No one does. That's kind of the point. We can't say with 100% certainty that we are spying on opponent leaders right now. So therefore, their counterplan is literally just the status quo, spy on our enemies more than we spy on our allies. So insofar as that's the case, you realize that they are fundamentally limiting by just asking you to go with the status quo. So where do we cleanly win the round? That's going to be on our C2 of protection. They say that we clean conceded and don't go for it. That's just not true. Nora frontlines it very well. We tell you that fundamentally we win this contention because of the economic benefits of stepping in, because when we spy on our allied leaders, we fundamentally know the conversations we're having. We have significantly more power in negotiations with them. And remember the anecdote that I gave, like if Nora is the leader of another country, all the way back in the PMC, we showed that you get significantly more negotiations that allows you to protect your own citizens. Now, let's go to the big picture, the largest things. First, my opponents take out all of their own backlash arguments. I don't know why they keep contending it for two reasons. First, their own nuclear overview that Nora brings up shows that if our allies are under the US nuclear umbrella, even if they find out that we're spying on them, they're not going to do anything. Then Nora reads another beautiful response that we pay for 80% of NATO, which means that they're really not going to do anything. Insofar as they can see both of these in the MO and LOR, you literally can't buy anything along these lines. Our allies can kick and scream all they want. They're not going to do anything because they're dependent on us, like way more than we are on them. So why do we win this here? Because first off, we have the cleanest link here to specifically economic benefits for the American people, American companies, and American governments, as well as the fact that politicians are going to want to do this so they're not being attacked in and of themselves. This is what's really important because this is actually a link that wins us the round because we have probability. Remember, if we know that a country is going to cut off tariffs or cut off trade with us because their leader was talking about it on the phone with someone, now we can begin to diversify our supply lines ahead of time, being proactive instead of reactive. Then look at their case. Remember, they don't really get access to any of the backlash impacts or any of the nuclear war impacts because they clean concede any bit of probability analysis. You're always going to be voting gov first on truth, second on econ. Thank you.
All
Good
right.
round, guys.
Good round, guys. Thank you guys for judging.
Yeah, of course. It's gonna take a hot minute, so we'll reconvene in a moment.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.